No one has ever shown that human emissions of carbon dioxide drive global warming.
We never had large fractions of unexpected sudden deaths, and now there's an absolute epidemic.
It was then that the light bulb went on, and I thought, aha, this explains it, because I know the TGA are not incompetent, but they're acting on instructions.
I haven't met one Aboriginal who cared about the voice, other than the ones directly involved with establishing the voice. They're out in the community. They don't care. They just want improved lives. They just want to be included.
I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare where no matter what I would say or do could convince people of the dangers they were facing because of the programming of the media and the government machine.
I would rather paper cut my eyelids than have anything to do with those votes.
The reason we're in the mess that we're in is because the people have been slack and lax. They've copped it, and they've just not held the politicians accountable.
We are the 99%, and as Stephen said, if we all stick together, if gay, straight, trans, black, white, Italian, Greek, European, American, we all come together, and we are, then they can't do this to us. We have a massive power, and it's the power to say no.
Aboriginal people say, white fellas saved us. You heard that right. White fellas saved us.
Our so-called sensible and mainstream politicians either don't care, don't know, or they do know and they're happy to turn a blind eye to it.
No, I don't want to move on from COVID because we're all suffering from the inflation caused by COVID. So, no, I don't want to forget about it, and I won't shut up about COVID.
Will we ever see the North Sydney Bears back in the NRL?
Oh, this is the question of the night. Yes, it's a resounding yes.
That's the kind of lying dog he is. That's the kind of low dog he is. The sort of bloke that would do you in. You'd never want to be in a trench with him.
We're all going to die! Why do they own so many private jets? And what's with all the mega yachts? I don't understand, right? It's easy. Trust what people do, not what they say. It's very clear that the elites of the world do not believe in climate change, even slightly.
So I've got to turn myself off mute. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the XCandidates. My name is Stephen Tripp. Obviously ready for a big year this year, 2024, but 2023 was a huge year for us. Hope you just enjoyed that opening package of some of the highlights of last year, and a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to everyone watching. Hope you had some really good rest and recovery and some enjoyable time with your family and friends. But welcome again, Adam. How you going, mate? How was your Christmas and New Year's?
Hey, g'day, Stephen. How you going? G'day, viewers, and g'day all our loyal supporters and followers out there. Happy New Year, and obviously Merry Christmas. It's we've had a week off as well, Stephen and I. So I mean, Stephen obviously he didn't have a week off because he's been sitting there doodling with all those clips and stuff like that to get a nice little promo package up there. So that was really special, actually, Stephen. So thank you for doing that. That was actually quite wicked. We have to maybe compress that and make that our new intro, I think. A few longer sayings in there.
I'm always tinkering with something. So like George Lucas, always tinkering with Star Wars, Yeah. I won't compare myself to George Lucas, but
no, but he probably shouldn't have sold it to Disney anyway.
Yeah,
and kind of ruined it after
that. That was probably a mistake. But Adam, last episode we had Michael O'Neill and Barbara O'Neill on, which was a really fantastic episode. But straight after that, one of our followers, Kim, jumped on to buy me a coffee and bought us 50 coffees, which is absolutely incredible. So thank you very much out there, Kim.
Thank you, Kim. Thanks for that. We really appreciate it. And we've been speaking about Kim's actually been really involved with us, and she's been helping us out as well with some other little things that we've got in the books or in the pipeline. So Kim is an extraordinary contributor and supporter of us. And I'd like to say thank you. And everyone else who also supports us. And, we don't, tally it all up and things like that, but we do appreciate everything that you guys do and showing your support. So hopefully we might have something out there soon for you guys. So you get a token for your gesture as well. So that will be interesting.
Yeah, no, Adam's lying. We've got a list. We write it all down. I'm joking. It's like that one of those fast forward shows back in I think it might have been Fast Forward or so. They had this skit where there's two people sitting in a church at a funeral, and one turns to the other and says, "I can't believe he's gone," and the other one turns around and said, "He's not. He's just upstairs seeing who turned up." The guy writing down all the names of people who turned up for the funeral. But anyway, I think this is a really interesting episode we've got here tonight. This is very important. It's a good way to start 2024 because education is huge, and especially when we look to the future of the nation, education is paramount. And some people try and move on with their lives and forget about a little event that happened 2 or 3 years ago. It was called the COVID pandemic, and we experienced a whole bunch of lockdowns and schools were shut and closed. Yeah, it's only small. You may have forgotten about it already, but we've got a special guest on tonight. His name is Jason Strecker. Now, Jason has taught for over 15 years and is the head of mathematics at a K-12 school. This year, his students ran a cost-benefit analysis on Australia's COVID response with some surprising results. So hopefully we'll get into those results tonight.
Absolutely.
He also established an accelerated program that enables students to begin a mathematics degree whilst in their final years of their studies. Prior to teaching, Jason held several positions in the IT industry in small to large businesses, in private and public ventures. This included responsibility for the largest enterprise management environment in the country at over 100,000 devices. He is a Spectator contributor, having authored articles on the effects of government policy and the impact of cultural change. And he also recently spoke at the recent Australians for Science and Freedom conference a few months ago. So, Jason, how are you tonight?
I'm wonderful. Thank you, Stephen.
Welcome aboard, Jason.
Thanks.
Very, very excited to have you. And also excited through the week, you sent me a document or a link to a document. Now, this is a proposed terms of reference for the COVID-19 Royal Commission. And as you can see at the top here, a lot of outfits have contributed to this terms of reference. And if we scroll down, your name is on here as well, along with a whole bunch of notable professors and scientists and doctors, people like Dr. Philip Altman, who we've had on the show previously, Professor Robin Cosford, Professor Gigi Foster, Professor Ian Brighthope, a bunch of really notable experts in their field. Can you let everyone know a little bit more about what these groups are hoping to achieve with this document?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And as you said, some very experienced and knowledgeable people are on that. If I can point out just a couple, Assistant Secretary General, former Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, Ramesh Thakur, for instance, is on it. Julian Gillespie, Peter Fram, Tony Nikolic in the legal department, plus a whole series of others as well. And as you said, Gigi Foster, well-known economist. Sanjay Sublock's a really interesting guy on there too, from the economics point of view. But he also served in the Indian bureaucracy, if you like, the civil service, and served under Dan Andrews in Victoria, which is a story in itself as well. So, look, I guess when you think about it, any business, if there's any major circumstance which has occurred, there's got to be a post-implementation review. So the major project, you look at what you did right and look at what you did wrong. Where it's a problem, where it's a critical situation, you have a root cause analysis to actually have a look and expose what actually led to the actual problem itself. And it seems to me that that's one of the things that's being avoided, like the plague, so to speak. And so what this actually is trying to do is bringing together people in different areas to actually enable that to happen. And one of the crimes, and probably one of the biggest crimes that happened, particularly in 2021, but certainly kicked in pretty quickly in 2020, is the atomization of society. So you couldn't actually talk to each other. If you did, you risked censorship, and we've probably all been censored in one form or another. And just that risk of censorship means that you embark on self-censorship as well. And none of those things are good for society. So it's taken time to get people together and gain momentum to put the ideas in place to hold government and government bureaucrats accountable for the decisions that they made. And so this submission has been a long time coming, and it's backed by some really, really good people and knowledgeable people. It is the best submission that we've seen to date. On the other end, if you look, I'm not employed by the government, and so I'm not inside the Prime Minister and Cabinet or anything else, so I can't speculate in terms of what their tactics will be. But the way these bureaucracies often work is like an organism. And so if they feel like they're going to be threatened, they will take measures to protect themselves. And so there is a risk that what will actually take place is we'll see the circling of the wagons. We'll see that the organism will try and protect itself by whatever measures it takes place. And so it might create its own submissions in the process too, to try and muddy the waters. And so what we really need from everyone, well, really everyone on this view and everyone around in Australia, is to support this, to give it profile so that the government cannot ignore what's being done and ignore this submission. The other part that's really interesting about this, and I'll just close on this part because I've spoken too much already, but is one of the really fascinating things about going through the whole lot is the enormity of what's taken place. So the submission is a few hundred pages long, and really it's a speck in the dust of what the entire implications are for those 2 to 3 years. And so, you know, for whatever page we've got in there of information, you can really write 10 more pages on the impacts to it. And that kind of illustrates a massive part of what the problem was when those decisions were taking place in 2020.
Yeah, and people can become signatories to this, right? We can put the link in the description. They can click the link and put their support behind it.
Please do so. That's exactly the numbers that will take place. So those signatures are what's going to get presented to support this document and kick off that process for creating the terms of conditions in a true sense for any inquiry on what the government response has been.
Why do you think that why do you think it's taking this much prompting or action or everyone having to do this to get the government to even do this kind of thing? Because, I mean, the simple answer from me would be because they're guilty of negligence at minimum. But, you know, why do you think that it's taking so much to get a royal commission into and you were saying this off air, into the reaction of on the government's response to the pandemic? Why do we have to fight so hard to get this, you think?
Politics. What's the upside? Like, I guess if you're talking, let's say Scott Morrison was still Prime Minister. What's the upside to having a commission into his own behaviour during that time? It can only end badly. There's not going to be too many things going to say, hey, you know, you did a fantastic job. What is interesting is we've got a different Prime Minister under Anthony Albanese who wasn't responsible, and so it's an opportunity for him to open things up. But we've actually seen recently through a number of bills that he's been put forward that he's avoiding doing that as much as possible. Why is that the case? I'm not sure. Perhaps there's influence inside the Labor Party because a lot of the states were governed by premiers. I guess that's the obvious answer. I've had the opportunity to meet Anthony Albanese on a couple of occasions, and you know what? My conversations with him have been better than most. And so I think he worked hard. I think he genuinely cared for people that he saw. So I'm not going to paint him into some evil picture, but nevertheless, it's puzzling. You know, why not? You've actually superficially you've got very little to lose. You know, you can open it up.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, it could give him points. It could get obviously, you know, he's polling badly. He's the Labor government is not really having much luck with any of their other policies and stuff like that, and people are starting to really wake up to the fact that everything that they're kind of doing is in the negative for the country, or in not advantageous to us as people of the country. Okay, we've got inflation, we've got interest rates, we've got all this stuff happening at the moment, and a lot of that could be fixed with policy, i.e., energy and things like that. But he could really use this to boost, to turn around and kind of pin Scott Morrison and the federal government, which was a Liberal government, to the board, and saying, well, you didn't control, even though they were Labor premiers and things like that. Everyone knew and everyone done their research, and federal government can overrule and overstate anything that a state government does anyway. So he could really nail the Liberal Party and try to get some sneaky points in here if he wasn't in charge, like you were saying.
I think there's a justice element to it as well. I started this process in 2020 by gathering figures. I'm a numbers person, so I was gathering a lot of data. And even though I knew or I suspected the data wasn't particularly accurate, I still gathered it. some of the things that were done pretty early on, you're actually botching the data, which makes it very difficult to analyse. And I think that's going to come to bite you, and that's kind of what happened, and it bit us. But the three figures which come to mind that the government either knew or were ignorant or were incompetent were figures around fatality rates on ships like the Ruby Princess, which docked in Sydney. Right, They have to have known, and we've probably all heard interviews of people on the Ruby Princess, and they knew that the fatality rate was somewhere below 0.3%. Now, for those that are uninitiated, Fauci said a few years ago that the fatality rate for the common flu, is about 0.1%. So that's his words.
Yeah.
And a ship like the Ruby Princess encountering a new disease, and the profile of the people that are on the Ruby Princess in terms of age and health and things like that is below average. So they knew that. They have to have.
Yeah.
So it kind of straight away tells you by sort of March, April 2020 that their response was disproportionate. Diamond Princess, the same figures. And the USS Theodore Roosevelt, a healthier population, was below 0.1%.
That USS Theodore Roosevelt, that was a naval vessel, wasn't it?
Yep. US.
Yeah, so you've got US naval vessels. So you've got younger, healthier, well, definitely fitter people on there. It's just, predominantly a stronger male population, obviously, in the boat. And that's that would have probably had a 0 to none fatality rate, according to the figures and what we're seeing now.
Correct. That's exactly right.
You brought up politics before. I think this is a clear example that our system works well. I mean, the fact that we can have royal commissions in the first place shows us that there is accountability built into the system. The problem is the politicians that they're putting in there are not using the system effectively. They're letting politics and party politics specifically get in the way. But just to explain to people how a royal commission works. So the terms of reference are set by the government. So that's the scope that the government will say to the people that they appoint to the royal commission. This is what you can investigate. And it's almost like having blinkers on, like a horse in horse racing. You can only investigate these areas, and everything else is to be ignored. Now, it's really great that you guys have put this document together because it's thorough. I haven't had a chance to read it, but I've skimmed through it. It is thorough, and it covers as many areas that should be covered, to be investigated. What was your contribution to this document?
Yeah, I very much looked at the education space. So some childhood development into teenager, and looking primarily at the education impact of our policies.
So what would you like the government to, if there was a royal commission and if they did adopt these terms of reference, what would you want the government to investigate? I guess specifically to education, but I guess you could dip into other areas as well that you didn't contribute to.
Yeah, look, in the education space, why lockdown in the first place? Why close schools? Why have the strategies in place that you did in terms of social distancing or masking? What was your justification for those things? Because I can't find any. It's as simple as that. Like, people will say, hey, we needed to do X, Y, Z. But when I actually looked at the data and the justification, it's just not there. There's some interesting things. I don't know if you want to go through now in terms of some of that evidence, which I think is really enlightening.
Absolutely.
Just to paint a picture. Well, so this talked about, you talked about sort of the politics behind it and perhaps the propaganda. We've got a series of hardened, experienced politicians that are used to public speaking, and they don't really trip up too much. So in New South Wales, the Health Minister, Brad Hazzard, and Barry Jickling as well.
Yeah.
Right. Both experienced politicians, and Palaszczuk, Queensland, and Dan Andrews in Victoria was a master at it. And at one stage, I ranked him the number one politician in Australia. I'm not saying he's the best leader for Australia. I'm saying the way he managed the systems was quite frankly amazing, right? You've got to pay credit where it's due. But the other group of people that go unnoticed and are actually less accountable are our chief health officers. and they're very much in the same boat. They're measured in their responses. They don't take risks or say things publicly where they don't have to. And one of the areas that actually cropped up during this process is in 2020, when Jeanette Young, the Chief Health Officer of Queensland, was questioned about why the schools were still closed and why they closed the school. What was the justification in the first place? Now, there's a series of politics as to why she had to respond to that. But I'm just going to read out because I want to get it right, and for your viewers to actually understand what it is that she said at that time, and that paints a picture.
This will come from your article here, which was in the Spectator.
Yeah, bring it up. Yep, we can read it straight off there.
Yeah,
so I'll have a look at it.
It says here, while evidence, and this is, as you said, Dr. Jeanette Young speaking in April 2020, she said, while evidence showed schools were not at high-risk environment for the spread of the virus, closing them down would help people understand the gravity of the situation. If you go out in the community and say, this is so bad, we can't even have schools, all schools have got to be closed, you are really getting to the people. So sometimes it's more than just the science and the health, it's about the messaging. So she's basically saying there's no real justification for closing down schools apart from sending the message that this is a serious virus.
And the impact, sorry to cut you off there, Jason, but the impact of that for working families, okay, like people send their kids to school and they work their routine, their lifestyle around their children going to school. So their work is all worked around it, and it's, you know, something in the process. Because I know when your child first goes to school, you know, in kindergarten, okay, you know, you can't leave them at the school half an hour early or 20 minutes early unsupervised because they're too little. So you've got to put them into like an USH program. So you drop them off a bit early and then you sneak off to school. You sneak off to work. You go work your full day, and then, you know, the kids can do after school as well. So then they'll go into after school for a couple of hours. Now, everyone, this is a paid for service. So you're paying for all this kind of stuff. But the great thing about the school, but you're only paying for a little bit in the morning and some in the afternoon. The school itself is kind of like free, or if you're paying for private schools and stuff like that, you know, that's part of your budgeting for that kind of thing anyway, right? So you can afford that in your budget. So the fact that they shut schools down, scared people into stop letting their children go to school, that affected far more than just, hey, the kids get, you know, a few weeks off and their education, you know, takes a bit of a hit, but that'll be all right.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. And what you've hit on basically is the fact that they've done something. They've done it for a behavioural science reason, not for a health science reason. Mm-hmm. And the Australian public have a right to feel betrayed in this, because we pay them a lot of money, a lot of taxation money to give health advice, things which are going to benefit our health. And to find that we've been spending that money and giving them that authority to manipulate us, I think this is disgusting. I think
it's disgusting. What we were talking about this as well. Come on, viewers, send us in the comments or something some words that we could use, not profane words. We want eloquent words, okay, to try and figure out what word we can use, because disgusting is one that was on the tip of my tongue when you said it as well. But it was abhorrent, ridiculous. It was stupid. You know, there was no evidence. Like these things, you know, and I think, like you're saying, like this, a royal commission is needed, 100% needed, because we need to get to the bottom of this. And I think what needs to be exposed is that, you know, the politicians are really just taking the easy way out. And I like what you said before as well about, you know, particularly Anthony Albanese and any. I don't particularly believe any one politician is actually a bad person in their own right, but by themselves. I don't believe that. I believe they all have families, they all have children, they all have, you know, an interest, you know, that they have to take care of other than their own back pocket. So I do believe that they're not all bad. But I think as a whole, I think the party system as a whole is bad. So they all fall into that group of a party here, and a party here. And the party itself can be influenced, and people just fall back onto it as a scapegoat kind of thing. Well, I didn't particularly do that, but we had to vote that way for the party, loyalty to the party, and then they just fall back on. I was basically like, the party's the boss, and I was basically doing what my boss told me. And I think that's how they justified some of their abhorrent actions. And who even likes that Brad Hazard guy? God, I hate that guy with a passion. He made me come into politics myself. And I'm one other thing as well. I know, because you're the teacher and part of the education thing, just quickly as well. And you might have picked up on a little bit, because I was really early in the piece. And what really got me into it actually was the way that Brad Hazard was treating journalists asking questions. And the one thing that stood out to me the most was when there was a school in Parramatta that they were giving their kids flu shots, and then 13 children ended up getting the COVID-19 shot. So how do you mix up the vials? First of all, why were the COVID-19 vials there? They hadn't been approved yet for people under 15 or whatever it was, because you know how they broke it up into different sections, right? And he said, and a journalist asked him, and I don't want anyone to forget this, because that Brad Hazard is fine. I think if anyone did anything really, really blatantly wrong, was him in this instance. And that fired me enough to get off my butt and actually, run and contest and, waste all my money in politics, right? But he turned around and said, well, we've given over 1 million doses. 13 mistakes is nothing. But they injected this crap into kids, whether you think it's the savior or not the savior, I don't care, but it's crap, right? Just in general. And they gave them the wrong jab for the day. And what happened to that? Did anything ever happen to that? Did anyone ever get accountable for that? Did those kids end up being okay? Or did they end up with myocarditis or pericarditis or something like that? And because they were young, it was the first batch of all the jizz that came out. So what is it? What's the go? Do you remember that by any chance? By any instance?
Yeah, I remember reading it. At that time, there was so much noise going on. But yeah, what you've just outlined is more detail than what I'm aware of. But it actually comes to the whole point of what we're actually doing here. When I looked at the New South Wales health data, and I actually collected it as soon as it was released, I collected it for 4 months. And because the hospitalizations were so badly defined right from day one, and even the fatalities are so badly defined because it was dying with COVID, not dying from COVID. And I could never understand why they didn't use the same definitions as they used for influenza, for instance. Like, you've got an existing set of processes in place. Why aren't you doing that so you can work out the consistency and you can give people an impression as to how dangerous it really is? To say a fatality rate may not mean anything to people, but if you say, it's 2 times more dangerous than the flu, then that has got something for them to hang their hat on. But what I actually found is, so I gathered every single day, I gathered the data, and I did it for 4 months and about 2 million cases. Wow. And I actually had to group together everyone under the age of 50 to get a reasonable figure of the fatality rate. It was just so low. Yeah. And so it raises the question of, why on earth would you put an untest? Well, it doesn't matter whether the vaccine is effective or not at this point in time. We know it's only been around for 6 months, 12 months. We don't know what the long-term consequences are. So the risk profile is so low to these kids. Why would you run the risk of putting something which has an unknown risk profile into them? I can never understand it. I honestly can't.
In your Spectator article, you talked about the precautionary principle.
Yep.
And you talked about how that can be weighed up against a cost-benefit analysis. You did a cost-benefit analysis. So if we can, I know you said you wanted to start talking about the evidence of lockdowns on education. We kind of got off track a little bit. Can we go back to that and really flesh that out?
Yeah. So you're talking cost benefit. Are you talking cost benefit analysis specifically?
So let's go. So lockdowns happen, and obviously the kids are not going to school. Obviously, as a teacher yourself, you're experiencing that, at the forefront. When did you start to analyze the effects that this was having on students, either positively or negatively? Like what maybe there was some positives of lockdowns, I don't know, but what were you seeing and how were you starting to evaluate that effect?
It's often the case that, your decision is a bit hard to actually determine what it is. Like there's a grey area, and so you kind of go, you're listing these positives and these negatives as you go along. There is no significant benefit that I could see from lockdown at the time or in hindsight. One of the things that really disturbed me already in 2020, and I was teaching some extended classes, so they basically were being advanced a year worth, and they're doing a fantastic job. And during that first lockdown in 2020, I got them to submit an assessment, which they did a really good job at. Now, we're in uncharted territory, so we didn't really know what was going to take place. When they came back, I went through their assessment, their submissions, and they actually didn't recall submitting them. As in, it's not just I forgot it because it was a month ago. It was I don't know. Like, and I would show it to them and say that's my handwriting, but I actually don't recall doing it. And I just stored that information, and I more than anything else, it was the strangest thing I've ever seen. It wasn't just I've forgotten something; it was just a blank memory, and I didn't know what that meant. And I saw that happen more and more, and I sent that information externally out, and just to have a review. And they said these are actually symptoms of trauma. And talking to the parents later, so I didn't conclude that. That was an external interpretation of the information I sent. Talking to the parents much later, like in 2022, so parents that were very much pro the government's policies, and they were then coming out and saying, actually, my kid's traumatized, and they're the words they started using. So already in that 2020, there's a series of kids that have been traumatized through the process. What is the effect of that? Oh, I don't know. Like we don't know. But the fact is we did it to them.
Do you know? Yep. Do you know specifically what kind of like traumatized for what? Like traumatized of having to be locked down, traumatized having being faced with a virus. What was the specific trauma?
Well, at the time, what you're talking about is blocking out parts of your memory. Is what the interpretation was. You've encountered something, whatever it is, so traumatic that you don't want to go back there, and so it's a trauma response.
Do you think it's because the parents were so scared as well, and they were like, like the ones that you were saying, right? So like the ones that were full on into it, when we all know these people, really just driving this into the kids.
Well, yeah. So again, it comes back to that first principles of what society do we live in, and what society do we think we live in. Okay, so I'm a Christian, and so I believe that we've got a Western society based on Christian principles. Whether you believe it's from Enlightenment principles or whatever, like we've got a crossover there from individual integrity, individual dignity, and a basis of honesty. Like if a business sends me, if I order some pens from a business, they send me an invoice. There's an expectation I'm going to pay that invoice. That's honesty, right? They don't actually. Maybe I don't. Maybe I skip the country. So we've got a culture that's based on honesty. And so we're paying government to actually provide honest decisions based on that. So we have this expectation that what they're telling us is the truth. And I don't blame any parent for coming to the decision they have, because that's their fundamental basis that you're used to. What has actually taken place is a complete betrayal of that honesty from people. So, it's not, and this is actually a really insidious part, because it just keeps going on. And so there is a number of parents, but there's general public, there's people in the general public too, that are starting to feel really guilty about what they actually did. And, then they'll go, okay, well, in terms of my kids, I just want them to have a good time. I want them to have fun. And part of that is, I get the impression there's an internal guilt in that process too. And it's perfectly understandable, because they're taking responsibility for their actions, but there needs to be an understanding that actually you were betrayed. Like you had that expectation that what you were getting was true, and it wasn't, and it should have been. Like there was enough information to say other things. You imagine Scott Morrison gets up there, and look, I believe that at the time when he won his miracle election, that was a phenomenal result, and our country was going to be better off, right? But as a result of that, so I wasn't anti Scott Morrison to start with, but can you imagine if he got up on those early days and he's carrying a bit of extra weight around, and he says to everyone, look, the virus is coming, right? It's going to come. We've never been able to stop a virus. So why don't you join me in eating healthy, getting fit, and dropping a few kilos? Because 100%. They already knew it. Because they already knew at the time that the number one, or one of the big causes of a bad effect of this type of virus was obesity.
Yeah.
But instead of that, they did the opposite. They
locked you down, get you out of the sun.
Right.
Eat junk food.
KFC,
Uber Eats jumped up crazy.
Look, the line to KFC, any of the KFCs around here was like a kilometre down the road.
Oh,
like
yeah.
that's not healthy. By all means, enjoy your KFC if that's what it is. But if suddenly the quantity of KFC that's being consumed has multiplied by, I don't know what factor, but by a lot, that can't be healthy for your society. So
make them fat and keep them dumb. That was the policy of the whole COVID pandemic, and that was, you can blame whoever you want, World Health Organization.
Yeah, so the kids laughed at me. They still laugh at me. My kids laugh. Well, I give them plenty of reason to laugh at me. But one particular thing, we walked into a bottle-o in June 2021, and we're talking to the owner there, and he goes, I think this is the last day I'm going to be open. I said, why do you think that? He says, we'll lock down to here. I said, mate, they're never closing you. No. Like, they are not going to close you. It doesn't matter what happens, you are going to stay open. Oh, why do you think that? And then we went on to the explanation. Yeah, you're right. Churches were closed.
Yep.
Places where people could go to for spiritual or social help.
Parks were closed.
Pardon?
Parks were closed.
Parks were closed.
They were. You remember they put all that evidence tape around them? Like, we had parks in my area where they had evidence tape. So the kid, well, you know what? Like, your kid can't happen to go down this slippery slide today or climb the ropes or do anything like that.
One of the points of cognitive dissonance which kept occurring, and I kept saying this at the time, and it was like I was talking a different language. Okay, fair enough. Is that New South Wales Health themselves kept saying they had 0 confirmed cases of COVID transmission in outdoor activities. Like, you can't get lower. Like zero, like zero. So what's the justification for putting police cars on Bondi Beach or anywhere else? What's the justification for closing off? Well, I think we know that from Jeanette Young's strategy with schools. It sends a message.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. And this is what it all became down about. And I'm glad you pointed that out with that Jeanette Young's message, right? Is that it was Big Brother giving everyone a wrap around the knuckles, right, and saying stay at home. And then they wanted to see who and what kind of people and who were the people and groups that would just do that. I think, like, and that's not a reason to destroy people's lives, to destroy, education in children and all that kind of stuff. We don't take school as seriously in this house, in my house, as we did pre-COVID. I was saying this to Stephen before you came on. If my kid, I've got three kids as well, and I've got a 16-year-old and a 12-year-old. Obviously, take 3 years off those guys for when they were pre-COVID, and we used to. I didn't care if they were had a stomach cramp. I didn't care if they had a small sniffle. If they were sick, and they stay home, right? But if it was just kind of like a, I don't want to go to school kind of thing, they always went to school. I've been a big stickler in that. Go to school, go learn, get education. And now, and I think education, and then when you can have a government who, with truancy officers and, it's a crime not to send your children to school and all this kind of stuff, right? And then all of a sudden they can close it down for 3 months, 4 months at a time, and then send them home and then go, I just work off your tablet, your iPad or whatever it is, tablet. And it was, I know a lot of teachers actually, and they worked really hard to try and get these curriculum onto these platforms in the backgrounds, and I appreciate all that kind of stuff. But I don't think we're 100% a technocratic society. So for me to convert, to go to the computers and to show my children how to go from one page to another, and Google Documents was, and then you've got to use another platform and copy and paste and things like that. It became very, very hard. And I think that ensued a lot of also trauma too between parents and children, because now parents are assuming a job. Like, we're not trained. I'm not a trained school teacher. I didn't go to university to teach my kids how to do stuff. I'll teach my kids how to use a screwdriver. I'll teach my kids how to cook. I'll teach my kids clean and do all those kind of things. But, the teachers are taught to teach our children the other skills, mathematics, reading, writing, and arithmetic and stuff like that, So I think that caused a lot of trauma as well in the household. I know it caused a bit of trauma in our household until I, picked up my socks and I said, I can't do it like this, guys. So I went out and I went and bought NAPLAN books for both my kids because my littlest one wasn't at school yet. So I said, right, I don't care about, we're religious as well, but I said, I don't care about religion as far as learning about it in a curriculum theory. I said, I went and bought NAPLAN books for mathematics, English, and I think something, I can't remember now what else it was. And I said, I don't care what we do about all that other stuff. I'll sort that out with the teachers later. I said, I need you to do 2 and 3 pages of each one every day, and then we'll mark it at night. And then after that, I said, if you finish it in 2 hours, like contractor work, okay? This is your task, 3 pages a day. Once you do those 3 pages a day, I don't care what you do after that. Go and have fun. And then my life and my family's life after that became a blast for that 3 months because we would go walking. We didn't even care. We went walking and all that stuff. So, sorry, I'm just talking about the trauma side of things. Sorry, I'm not trying to talk over the top of you all that.
No, there's so many powerful things about what you just said. I can spend the rest of the hour just talking about those. So in 2020 already, New South Wales Education knew that we weren't going to get through the quantity of information from online versus in face, and so they actually put in a series of recommendations which effectively dropped the quantity by 46%, so basically half. Okay. Wow. Now, as it turned out, I think most schools probably did about a third. Now, if we're claiming that education is actually important, how is it that we can actually suddenly reduce it by less than half of the original quantity? Or is education or is the schooling system not important? Like, can we get away with doing the school in not 6.5 hours, but in 3.75 hours or something else? Like, it's crazy. The other part that really that they knew already straight away, just no one was willing to say it, is we already had technology issues dating back to, Kevin 07 was the one child per laptop that they rolled out. Look, standard project management and requirements says, well, what is it you're actually trying to achieve by this process? Throwing technology at a bad problem is just going to make the problem worse, right?
Yes.
So we already knew that we had issues with technology in the lead up to 2020. In our math space, in particular, but others as well, we were weaning students off the use of technology and certainly managing it in an age-appropriate way. Then we suddenly turn around in 2020 and say, no, it's okay to spend 6.5 hours in front of it. And then we expect not to have consequences.
It's funny, Jason, because my wife is a primary school teacher, and I asked her today, because I wanted a little bit of a background before this interview. I said, what did you notice when the kids came back to school from lockdowns? And she said the biggest thing that stood out for her was the reliance that they had on their devices, iPads, iPhones, all that sort of stuff. So they're just glued to these devices now. But another interesting thing that you told me when we spoke off air, and this goes a little bit to the trauma side of things. You're saying that kids have blacked things out because they were traumatized, but also you were saying when we spoke, even the most diligent students, the students that really wanted to work hard, found it hard to keep up with the requirements during this time of lockdowns. And you said one of the most interesting things was the times tables. So kids would know their 5 times tables and their 7 times tables, but for some reason they didn't know their 6 times tables. And it was during that period of lockdowns that the 6 times table, you were teaching the 6 times tables. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, that one's a simple example so we can understand, because people very quickly get confused when you're using mathematical concepts. So that's an example of what's taking place. Now, the actual thing that I saw across schools and talking to different parents, even in different regions, is the similarity of the things that are missing. And they're to do with, probably not surprising, to do with algebra, and they're to do with some factorization stuff, which is equivalent to doing the mental messaging that you're doing with times tables. You can't do the factorizing without the times tables, etc. So, there is definitely... there's just gaps there. And so you look at that. It's like, it's exactly what you said. It's like saying, okay, well, kid knows what 3 times 4 is, and they know that 3 times 2 is, and they know that 3 times 7 is. And then when they come into their calculations, and it happens to be 3 times 6, and they've got nothing, just a blank. And so you can be doing problems that involve that kind of thought process, and they'll be getting it right some of the times. But then, for some reason, they're not getting it right, and the reason is because they have solid gaps in those things. What's fascinating is, and this is a very small pool, so I'm not going to say conclusively this is everywhere in Australia or the world. This is my experience. But what I found fascinating is when I've actually helped kids through this process in that similarity problem, and I thought, I've done a pretty good job explaining it. But in pressure conditions and exam conditions, they default to behaviour, which kind of makes sense. If you've practiced it one way and it's the wrong way, when you come to game time, you're going to do it the wrong way again. Yeah. And so what I found is in test conditions, for instance, they were repeating the same mistakes, even though in class or when I was with them, they were able to do it correctly. The actual thing that changed the behaviour was a story around it. So we would create a story around the mistake. And sometimes it's talking about Milgram's experiment. Mum or dad are going to electrocute you if you get this one wrong again. Now, the electrocution sounds extreme, but it's done in good humour. And so what that means is when the kid, or what has happened, or when students have reported back to me and suddenly it's changed, they go, well, okay, what was it about my fantastic teaching that enabled you to do it? And they said, well, actually, I remembered the story. And the story reminded me of the mistake that I made in the past, which meant that I could understand what it was I was supposed to do. So that's something quite new. So there's a narrative that's taking place in terms of the way the kids are learning as well.
Yeah, okay. And you've had 15 years of experience, and you haven't seen these things before. These are things that are just popping up specifically post lockdowns.
Absolutely, yeah. It's I've never seen anything like this before.
What about delays in development? And this might just not be specific to educational development, but development, socializing and mixing with other students. Did you notice anything there when kids came back?
Yeah, there's a really it's not just kids coming back that we're noticing it. It's a flow-on effect, which doesn't seem to be stopping. And I'll tell you a tale, I guess, if you like, in early 22, when we first came back. To our school's credit, straight away back in 22, they did school camps, and they did it early in the year, and it was wet, and people are still panicking around spread of COVID and everything else. And so credit to our school, they went ahead, right? Other schools didn't. And I had a chat to the camp conveners there, and they were very much on board with government policy. They had friends in the health industry or whatever it is. And I saw things then that I'd never seen before in terms of social interactions. It was the worst group I'd ever had. Now, they weren't terrible kids, but their socialization and ability to listen just wasn't there. So to give you an example, one of the conveners did a fantastic job, really good job explaining some stuff with regards to canoeing, right? Really interesting. And in the middle of that conversation, a group of kids would just turn their back on him and start their own conversation. Never seen it before. Wow. And so I had to stop them, our kids, and say, look, that's just completely unacceptable, apologise, blah, 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 blah. And then I said, look, mate, I'm really sorry about that. I've never seen that before. And we spoke about it more afterwards. He says, no, that's a regular occurrence. He said, look around the camp. And I said, what do you see about the conveners? I said, well, they look happy. And he said, you guys are the best group we've had so far at all. And they were the worst that I've ever seen. Anyway, so he was still pro, and a few of them were still pro what the government did. 12 months on, and I said, well, I've got this theory that says basically they're going to be delayed, and they're going to be 2 years delayed in their socialisation schools, roughly. And that's what explains what we're seeing. But what I was actually hoping is that over time that would close, that gap would close. So when I spoke to him 12 months later and asked him his opinion, he said, no, it's a fixed 2 years. It hasn't changed. And we're starting to program that to be 2 years. So last year I had a group of year nines. Look, I've got them in year 10, and they're lovely kids, but they were bad. They were the worst, probably the worst group I'd ever had in terms of behaviour and socialization and the rest of it. It's not that they were individually bad. They're just doing really awful things. And they were considered a troubled group. And it took me a few months to actually sit back and watch them and think about what's the constant thread in all of this. And what it was is, you imagine, 15-year-old boys, they're growing, they're physically strong, right? They've got hormones pumping and all the rest of it. They now place a 13-year-old brain in that 15-year-old body. And what would you expect to see? And when I thought about it, I thought, actually, I'd expect to see exactly what I'm seeing.
Well, you'd see carnage, right? Because it's almost at adult strength at that point, right? Like, you're almost at your adult strength at that point. And if you haven't got the mental capacity or the maturity to be able to handle that, which, all of us being men here have had to go through, that's a key factor. I mean, it's all about, mental control. You have to have that mental control, because I still remember what it felt like at 15-year-old, mate. You're invincible, bulletproof at that age.
Right. Now drop your age by 2 years, your mental age by 2 years.
You got a superhuman baby. That's what that is.
Could it also be, because in years gone by, you start school at such a young age, so you don't know any different. You're going to school every day, and that's all you know. You don't know anything outside of school. It's not until year 12 and you go out into the big world, but you're an adult by that stage. But these kids have had the experience of what it's like without school, away from school, learning from home. Do you think that's a huge impact? That now that they have had to go back to school, they've gone, well, why do I have to be here? Why does it have to be this way?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that question is definitely being asked by kids themselves. That's certainly the case. There's multiple ways of looking at it, and there's going to be multiple dimensions and factors that are involved in what we're actually seeing. So you can't, I guess the question is listing them out, finding out what they are, but then on top of that, what is that individual impact? And both those things are difficult to know. So there is no doubt at that time there were kids out there that were enjoying themselves and going for bushwalks, do the things that you can do, because let's face it, you couldn't do anything else.
That's right.
As a parent, it's you're trying to keep things going. You're probably stressed yourself, and some people have lost their jobs during that time, and others are in fear of their jobs. They don't know what's going to happen next, and so but they love their kids still, and they're trying to work that out. And so you're going to do the kinds of things like let's do something, let's do something fun. That is going to distort then the kids' development.
It could be the most basic, simple situation that there's only one computer in the house, and suddenly, parents are working from home, and the students just don't have an access to a computer to do their schoolwork. So what do? They play PlayStation, or they sit around watching TV all day. It could be
the priorities change. The other thing as well that's you guys, Anna.
I was going to say, just with that topic of how the kids turned around mid conversation and just completely ignored the person who was speaking and stuff like that. Don't forget too, that's a thing also, because when you're watching a video, okay, even an educational video on your device, okay, or you can turn around and go and do something else for half a second. You can go and go to the toilet or go get a sandwich or whatever you got to do in there, in the nicer kind of things, or talk to your brother or sister or whatever it is, right? And then go back, and all you would do is just go back, and then you could watch it again. And it's kind of like learned behavior, right? So that's kind of like, well, I've got because we had our teachers doing videos, or my children had their teachers doing videos and stuff like that. And, they would just, hit the pause button, go and do whatever they wanted to do. Because, this was the whole frustrating thing about the whole computer thing, because I'm not the greatest on this stuff. I don't really believe in them that much, right? And what happens is, you can, and I'm just like, that's why I got rid of them. I said, you know what? It ain't working. It's frustrating me. You're not learning anything. And then I said, let's do it the way I'm the teacher now. I'm the teacher now. Here's the textbooks. This is what you have to do. And after that, as I said when you were saying, but learn behaviors. Even with a textbook, you can still put it down, but you lose your page or whatever. So it's something that you can work through. It's like a physical thing, because they're only kids as well. So they know they start at the top of the page, they work their way to the bottom of the page, and then they have a result. Online, or I think in computers, and this is what I find very hard to get my head around, is that for me, there's you have your set tasks to do in a day or something like that, but you go through it, and there's always more. Like, it's never ending. It's just there's no real result. You turn it off and then you turn it back on, and it's all still there. Whereas that's what I was finding was the issue with the kids. But in a textbook, you have a page, and then it's finished, and then you can go do what you want, sign off. Yeah,
there's so much in that as well. So one of the learned behaviors, which actually, a parent pointed this out to me a little while ago when I presented them with a set of information. And it partially, again, it's another thing that explains what we're seeing. And it certainly explains a couple of instances I've had at school just in the last year I've never seen, that has never happened to me before. But you made the point that, politicians aren't necessarily evil per se, right, as individuals. And certainly Solzhenitsyn says, the line between good and evil runs through everyone's heart, right? We're all capable of that, basically. We're all, from a Christian sense, we're all capable of sin or whatever, right? We're all capable of those things. And so when we cast our mind back to the USSR, for instance, I remember as a teenager growing up going, they must have been so well behaved because the consequences of stepping out of the line would be huge. So everyone's law abiding, right? That turned out to be a complete farce. What had actually taken place is that there became so many rules that the general population thought, well, we might get pinged by something, so we're just going to act like and do whatever we can get away with. So effectively, if you've got too many rules, you've got no rules because you can't keep all the rules. And so I think there's an element of the fact that we kept producing so many rules as a society, the 11 a.m. dial in to find out the things which are going to save your life for the day, and the rules would change, and it just becomes rule upon rule upon rule. And I wonder what impact that's had on us and our kids coming through. And so some of the behaviors some of the things that would be explained anyway by this is that kids are often could be making decisions based on what they feel. So I want to do X. Well, that's what I'm going to do. And if there's a rule that's in place, I'm not really going to think about it. I'm just going to do X, and they're going to try and work around the rule as I go along. And so what it's changed in the society, I'm not saying this is a revolution. I'm saying this is having an influence, is a thought process of being rules driven rather than being the core elements of what makes us a good society.
What morals driven?
Well, yeah. So Professor Ian Benson, a legal lecturer from Notre Dame University, has been pushing the concept of virtue, and I think he's probably on the money. And he said that one of the things that our legal system has lost, which is why we've seen court cases go the way they have, is we haven't been inculcating virtue into our society. And if that's true, then we've been removing that concept of virtue over time in our kids as well. And if that's the case, then the only thing that is left is to be a rules-based system. But you can never create enough rules to create a society. It's just impossible. So I wonder whether that explains some of the behaviours that we see too. Now, I'm not saying it completely does, but I think it probably does in a number of instances. There's a really a chilling story. It'll only take me 30 seconds to explain it. In 2021, I took my dog for a walk down to the football field, right? I was going through past some small forests, some trees and stuff like that into the football field. And I come across a group of teenagers, and there's about, 8 or 10 of them, and they're doing exactly what you hope they do. They're playing footy, right? They're playing football. A helicopter flies overhead, and they scatter for the bushes. They just run from the trees. Now, that sounds really irrational, except for the fact the week before, there were police helicopters above a basketball game in Western Sydney, breaking up teenagers and sirens and all the rest of it, saying we're going to come and arrest you. So we've inculcated a response to helicopters in these kids' minds. Now, it sounds funny to say, okay, well, they ran for the trees, all the rest of it. What's the impact to that?
But why were they? So what were they doing? They acted guilty for something that's not being guilty at all. Kids playing.
No, they were guilty. Yeah, you were at that stage. You weren't allowed to be out with more than one person.
Oh, really?
we don't appreciate how young these kids are, and we think of things through our own life experience, but we've had so much life experience that we can compare the lockdowns to our whole lives beforehand. But they've got such a small span of life. And this would have had a huge impact on them. And one thing we're talking about all these things, but one of the things we haven't talked about is mask wearing. And, you still see people walking around the streets wearing masks. But the thing that kills me inside is when I see little kids with masks on, especially when they're outside. And we had whole classrooms with kids with masks on. And I've heard people, notable people talk about the delayed development, like say babies have, because they haven't seen, everyone's been covered up with a mask. They haven't seen
what a smile is.
Smile, Have you noticed anything there?
Yeah, I mean, I deal with, so probably first thing on that lower end, talking to some friends in the speech therapy area, they said they've never had so many cases. They said, if you want a job, go into occupational therapy and speech therapy. That's a consequence of that, direct consequence. Later on, there were some really sad incidences that I was really quite upset about occur to teenagers around face masking. Because the problem is it's in combination with a few other. Well, face masking itself is bad, right? It has a set of costs. It's not zero cost. I tried to do the right thing. Okay, I didn't want to cause issues for my school because you've heard the stories about police turning up and fining and all the rest of it. I didn't think that was fair on the school, and it wasn't fair on me either. But the reality is I could not wear a mask for more than an hour or so without getting a headache from carbon dioxide. The communication with the students was terrible. They couldn't hear me. I couldn't hear them. I could not detect facial expressions. I could not detect where different things was going from. And thankfully for me, in our school, the students were pretty good. But if the students decide to take advantage of that, there is so much they could get up to in that process. How do you tell who's doing what? You can't, because you can't see the facial expressions. Yeah. All of that is bad. But I'll tell you what's worse, and it's the connection with fear and face masking. But it gets worse than that. I know there's several people have said it. Bonhoeffer basically says, so German theologian, that we'll be judged basically on how we treat our kids. Aaron Cariati, psychiatrist and ethical psychiatrist, said a couple of years ago, just to quote him, any society that uses children to shield adults from harm has entirely lost its moral bearings.
Yep.
And I think that's right. John MacArthur just recently said, the theologian John MacArthur said that there's a war on children, and that children are the target of our society at every level. Whether that's true or not, I think that's worth bearing in mind because it's pretty chilling. So one of the impacts I saw is the connection of fear, responsibility, and face masks. So when the fear of death or harm from COVID didn't stick for kids, it ended up being they couldn't continue to justify it, even though they tried. There's newspaper. In one of the articles, I actually talk about one of the newspaper articles in Victoria where they tried to associate a person in their 20s with the death of COVID, and it looks to me by the press releases it was a drug overdose, and they knew it, right? So there's the connections, but eventually the narrative didn't take hold, right? So they changed the narrative to, oh yeah, you might survive, but you're a dirty disease spreader and you're going to give it to granny and kill granny. Yeah. That's horrible. And we're talking some really nice kids, really good kids took that on board and felt responsible for everyone else out there. Now that doesn't stop. So I had kids there still wearing face masks after they weren't mandatory because they had a cold. And I'd sit next to them and go, look, you don't have to do this. Like, don't do this for me, please. But they were so concerned that they would give someone else a cold or something else who would then might affect someone who is vulnerable.
Well, you know what? This is
horrible.
Life.
So sad.
But this is life. You're not responsible. You're not responsible.
Right.
For that kind of thing. That's life. Like if you can go to the shops without a mask, you can go here without, you can do everything without it, then that's it. You're free and clear of the mask wearing thing.
So that's the rise of safetyism, having some zero risk presented to you, and that's just impossible. I bike ride. Getting older, I was running, playing soccer, and as time goes on, the injuries kick in. You change your sport as you go along. I crashed my bike today. Stupid accident, getting old, uncoordinated, and I've probably broken a rib, right? Oh, that's bad, isn't it? Like bike riding, busting a rib. Why would you bike ride? Well, everything has its risk and benefit. Okay, why don't I run? Okay, well, I've ruptured my Achilles running, right? Okay. Why don't I play soccer? Okay, I did my knee in, or whatever it happens to be. Mountain biking, I've tore my arm open a few years ago mountain biking, right, and broke it. So that sounds bad. So I guess I should just sit on the couch and watch TV and put myself in a bubble. Oh, look at that. I've just made myself really unhealthy. Now I'm going to die of a heart attack. Like everything has its risk and its benefit. And to say that there is this thing that you can do, which is going to provide a zero risk in an environment is a lie. It's just not, it's not possible. And then to not justify those costs at all and say you just must do this is negligent. I don't see any other word for it.
They're just doing it just for just to scare people. It's right. As Adam said before, it's abhorrent. But you've done a really good job tonight of giving us your experiences and what you've witnessed and observed. Obviously, your school wasn't the only school locked down. Schools across Australia were locked down, and also around the world.
Yep.
Have you heard any experiences or data or anything else from other teachers, from other schools, or from other countries?
Yeah, so I've done some internal testing for us, the standardized testing, a few other bits and pieces. So there's a whole series of things we can talk about. But basically, what this boils down to is a consistency of impact. Now, there might be other studies which show something different, but the ones I've seen have actually been surprisingly consistent. And there's a US study that was done 12 months ago, and it basically equated their lockdowns of schooling to the impact of Hurricane Katrina on a year's worth of education. So their standard their impact was a particular number, and the impact they came up with school closures was worse than that. So to put you in perspective, Hurricane Katrina, a year's worth of education. If you remember the floods in New Orleans and all the rest of it and how kids would have been affected, this is worse than that.
Yeah, you've got on. So this is back to your Spectator article. Average fall 2021 maths test scores in grades 3 to 8 were 0.2 to 0.27 standard deviations. I don't know what that means, but you might be able to explain that, Jason. Lower relative to same grade peers in fall 2019, while reading scores were 0.09 to 0.118 standard deviations lower. This is a sizable drop. For context, the math drops were significantly larger than estimated impacts from other large-scale school disruptions such as Hurricane Katrina. Math scores dropped 0.17 standard deviations in 1 year for the New Orleans evacuees. Yeah. So this is worse than big, hurricanes like Katrina.
Correct. So imagine this. I don't know if you can remember what a bell curve or normal distribution looks like. And basically what we've done is we've shifted a whole population, if it looks like that, 10 to 20% to the left. So we've dumbed them down, if you like, about 10 to 20%, the whole population that have gone through this.
And have they made adjustments to the bell curve to make that like average now in their curriculum?
We don't know.
Because that's scary, like if you were 5 years ago, because even through politics,
didn't they just change the NAPLAN?
They changed it. They changed what the average criteria is now or something. They moved.
Yep. The official line that they said, I'll misquote it, so I just want to be careful. But they said the official words were, this change from last year has been several years in the making, and so they implemented it last year, and you can't compare it to any previous figures.
Wow.
That's their words.
And so basically justifying all the mistakes and the lowering of our education across the board, because we know, Stephen and I know through politics, because education was part of the party's platform and stuff like that. And what happened was, we know that children were Australian children were 5 years in mathematics behind their peers in Japan. So kids in year 6, Australian students in year 11 are learning what children are learning in year 6 in Japan. So that was a statistic that was really something like that was really thrown around. I mean, that's paraphrasing. There's a lot more to it, but there's a lot that was being thrown around a lot. And, we've had, people who are very involved with education, through their whole careers in politics and stuff like that, telling us these things, and actually has a history of working very hard in the political realm for increasing the standard of education in Australia. So if we were pre or during COVID or 2020 to 2023, right? If we were already 5 years behind, then we've had COVID and lockdowns, and it's impacted us by 2 standard deviations. Has that now, would that, as far as just as anecdotally, so people can understand it. Does that mean now that kids in year 11 are learning what kids in Japan are learning in year 4?
No, this is where it gets really interesting. So let me put a thought in your head in terms of a generalization. Roughly in the maths space, we've lost 20 positions, international positions in 20 years is what it roughly is, roughly a position per year. So that goes to your story. The last 3 years is really interesting because everyone closed down. So everyone's reduced by, 10% or so, varying degrees depending on the country you're in. And so everyone has moved to that left. So you're not comparing it to, so Japan now is worse than Japan 3 years ago.
Right.
So so it could well be that we've held our position because everyone has gotten worse. So
the Stephen Bradbury way, kind of.
The Stephen Bradbury. So it's look.
Just imagine if we hadn't locked down, we would have caught up.
Well,
yes.
And I want to actually just say something there to you as well, Jason, because I didn't realize. Teachers used to tell me all the time, multiplication, times tables, you got to know them. I didn't realize it didn't come to a point until I was actually trying to teach my child, my middle daughter, during the lockdowns. And I'm kind of there, and we're trying to do, she would have been she's going into year 7 now, so she would have been in year 4 or something like that. So we're talking pretty basic mathematics. I mean, like I can look at it, as I should be able to, and just flick through it. You know what I mean? And then she's looking at it like, oh my goodness. And I'm like, well, it's kind of like multiplication. And you got to do this, this, and this. And then they're talking about algorithm. She's going on about algorithm this and blah, 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 that. And I said, look, I don't understand your fancy terms. I said, I just know what we got to do. I put this on top of this, and then I do the multiplication this way and blah, blah, blah. And she's like, okay, no worries. She didn't understand any of that. So her biggest challenge was every day she had to do her times tables. And I'm so glad I did that, because I said to her, I didn't realize that you can't do any mathematics without actually knowing your times tables.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly right. So there's a philosophy at play as well, which actually hinders this all happening. It's called a constructivist philosophy, which is, it's in and out, but it's actually had a lot of influence. And there's a whole series of reasons why that's the case. But it works against the rote type learning, so the memory work learning. But the reality is this. You've got to know some things instinctively to be able to do other things, right? So if you don't know your times tables, how is it that you can do your algebra and cancelling down? Okay, who wants to know algebra? Well, you know what? The algebra calculations are the basis of the electronic devices they're actually using now. So maybe you make a mistake and maybe the circuit board blows up instead. There's a whole series of things that cascade their way through in levels of complexity. And the starting point is you need to have a number of things as a basis that is instinctive for you to say. Otherwise, you just can't process. It was insightful, this is before COVID, a few years ago, looking at a group. So the top group in the year 12, it's called the New South Wales Extension 2, but they're basically doing sort of university level maths at that point in time. And I remember watching them go through a difficult problem, and I was just watching them think. And they had 4 steps they needed to do. And it took them a few minutes. And I asked them after a while, because I could see that the cogs were turning, but the answers weren't coming. And they said to me, well, the problem is I'm going through, there's 4 steps to be done in my head. But, the first one's like a times table, and the second one might be a bit of a fractions, and there's some complicated stuff. But by the time I get to that 3rd step, I've forgotten what the problem was in the first place. So rather than being able to instinctively go through the first steps, then jumping into the 3rd, they're kind of going, I have to work out the first, I have to work out this. What was the problem again? So that's the impact of not having those instinctive type things as a basis.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's a problem.
Well, I'm not a maths wizard at all, but that's amazing what you're saying there. And so, I know we're getting very close to the end, obviously, right? But I've got a question, just from your observations, and this is anecdotal. So this is, I'm not holding you to any of this, or it's not going to be, even though it's going to be live and whatnot, it's not, what are the long-term effects that you're seeing patterns of now? I know it's hard to answer that, but what would be your fear of a long-term effect from the impact of the lockdowns now regarding education and mathematics and whatever you think?
Yeah, so Gigi Foster and Sanjay Sublock have done the most comprehensive cost-benefit analysis so far on this topic. So I recommend anyone who's interested to buy it or to download the executive summaries out there. You can actually do for free as well. I can put it up on screen if you're behind me. But it talks about kids that are being born at school now are going to lose hundreds of millions of dollars, like as a society, Australian society, and productivity and all sorts of other reasons too, shortness of life and everything else. Interesting enough, the kids that are born during lockdown times, their estimation is they're going to lose $30,000 in income on top of that. Who's paying that? Like, who's going to give that to them? Because they're not responsible for it. It wasn't their fault. So, are the people that are pro-lockdown going to do it? Is Scott Morrison going to pay it out of his savings? Is he going to give all of them $30,000? So there's a whole series of impacts. Now, I know they're dollar figures, but they're things that we can at least imagine.
And measure.
Yeah, and measure. So there's a whole series of things like that. We don't know. We actually don't know what the long-term consequences of this is. Like I said before, so to give you an idea in terms of planning, it's
generational theft.
It's generational theft. Yeah. So to give you an idea, I guess that's a personal interaction. I was hoping, and I talked about the 2 years, we put plans in place in terms of mathematics to try and catch kids up in that time, right? And we worked really well. We've trimmed out the things we didn't think were as essential, and we focused on the things that we thought are. I then extended it to 6 years. I said it's going to take us 6 years to get there. I'm now at about 12 years. So, yeah, there's such a flow-on effect of everything going through. But your question is, your question is long-term. What's the effects on that? Well, okay, there's academic effects. I think you're going to have potentially relationship effects. You're going to have, one of the things that came back in one of the studies during the lockdowns was that, well, teenagers, young people weren't able to meet each other. So during that time, how do you start a relationship or a family if you can't meet the person?
Yeah.
That was a really good point. That was a real stressor, right?
I mean, I think the iPhone's done a lot towards that as well with applications and stuff like that. You know what I mean? As in negatively impacting meeting people, because now it's swipe left or the swipe right. It's meaningless. It's hollow, and what happens is, before at least you had a conversation with somebody and you could kind of like, you meet them, you get the feel for them, you kind of have that physical interaction, right? On this, it's just bang, 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 and it's a numbers game. So if you want to get, meet somebody or have it, and it's a conversation. I'm finding that it's just so there's very little meeting and speaking with amongst people in person today. You could have a conversation with somebody on a mobile phone for a month before you'd even meet them.
Yeah, it's true. There's an impact of technology. I mean, look, you can actually use some things of technology for some positive things too. So, back in the day, maybe if you're a young guy and girl and you meet, maybe you become too physically attracted too early without actually finding out about the person itself. So what did you used to do? You used to ring each other on the phone, right?
Yeah.
Send an email. Okay, used to write, I guess, but now it's sending an email. Facebook or social media can actually be quite good for general communications, if assuming you don't take it too far in terms of photos and things like that, but to get to know each other in a non-physical sense. So there are some positives in that process too. But to your point, I think one of the figures I don't have, but the number of people I've met and seen on this, I think is quite frightening, is the increase in use of antidepressants as an example. And so during those lockdown times, there's no doubt the stress level went up. Cortisol production went up, our health went down, depression went up, all those things. And I think the figures are yet to come out. But in terms of long term, well, what is the long term implications of those things? And I think that's why it's actually really important, kind of coming full circle, to do the Royal Commission so that people can actually see what measures actually worked and what didn't. Now, in my mind, looking at them, pretty much all of them didn't work. The last one standing was the border closures in the first place in 2020. But having looked at that now and looking at the impact of those people that were stranded overseas, it's not. And I guess writing on an article, I wrote on one of the articles the difference between, for instance, the correlation, the highest correlation to your least impact during lockdowns was your access to a private jet. That gives you an idea. You had a private jet, you did whatever you wanted, basically. Sorry, I'm talking out of turn. That's a hyperbole. But if you read the article, it's all those figures are there, and that. So, but for the general person, we're impacted by this. What are those long-term impacts through schooling and all the rest of it? We don't know. But that is one of the insidious things that's there, which again is why the Royal Commission is so important, so people can actually have some visibility of what took place. Perhaps they can then say, hey, you guys have betrayed us, and that at least puts a name to the issue, which enables the issue to be dealt with, and hopefully we can then make up some ground from that point forward.
Yeah,
so that's
Jason,
my hope.
I think we've done a good job tonight identifying the issues that happened during COVID. We talked a little bit about what we can do next, and you said it could be a 12-year process, but there's another boogeyman sitting there off into the, it could be a couple months time, could be a couple of years time. Who knows how long this will be? But my wife at the end of last year, as I said, she's a teacher. She had to go to a presentation from ChatGPT, which is an AI thing that everyone is getting familiar with. And they were trying to sell this to the teachers. And they was basically saying, look, you're not going to be able to stop students from accessing this technology to write their essays. So you're going to have to start to incorporate it into their learning. And then he also switched and said, you can also use it to mark their essays. So not only are the kids using ChatGPT to write the essays, the teachers are using it to mark the essays. So I guess, my taking the student and the teacher out of the learning process. But I guess my point of the whole thing is, where do you see AI having an impact on education in the years ahead? I mean, it's already here.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the dumbest things that I've heard in terms of things. It takes us back to Kevin Rudd's one laptop per child without thinking what you're trying to achieve from the process, what you're trying to achieve. Look, right now we can see the difference that ChatGPT makes. So when someone submits it, you can actually see it that's the case. But yeah, moving forward, who knows? It's really dumb to actually say rely on it, because what you're actually relying on is not this God. You're actually relying on a set of programmers that are in a particular area that have a particular bent on what they actually think. And you're probably familiar with the different tests they're put through with ChatGPT and its responses on it. So it's really serious in terms of the potential impact to our culture. It's the same as if you type something in Google, for instance, which is an amazing piece of technology. What they've done with that mathematically is impossible. I had one of the a very fast system for processing events in the IT industry, and we probably processed it at hundreds of events a second. Maybe it was 1,000. This thing's doing millions to billions. Like, that's extraordinary. But if you think that the search that you're actually getting is objective, you're being fooled. And so ChatGPT is exactly the same process. And so we let it loose, and, well, I guess we're going to end up with the same sort of thing that we've got now, just on steroids.
And Adam and I were having this conversation before we started. We're talking about playing guitar. You don't learn on an electric guitar straight away. You have to learn on an acoustic guitar first, because you have to learn the basics. So why do kids have laptops and iPads in their hands? Why can't they just go back to old school basic, arithmetic and writing and
reading and writing,
reading a book, having a textbook and writing in the textbook? Why can't we go back to that? Why do we have to have all this technology that seemingly, for me, is giving the information there on a silver platter for these students, and then they're not having to investigate on their own? Like, I remember back in the day when I was at school, you had to go into the library, and the books that they had in there were from the 70s, they were decades old. But you would actually have to filter through them and try and find the answer, and you're learning as that goes along. But now you can just type it into Google, and soon you'll be able to type it into these AI services, and you'll have the whole essay written for you. Why can't we just go back to the old fundamentals?
Well, actually, to some extent we are. So in our school, we are actually, again, hitting that process, and we deliberately did it as a faculty. We discussed it, and pretty much, everyone came up with the same decision independently is that we are seeing massive issues with regards to technology uses. And so we are actually extracting its use and bringing back pen and paper more so as we go along for that exact reason. There is definitely a concentration, but there's also a temptation component as well. If you're able to run these devices with multiple processors, the kids can quickly flick between them, and then you've got a distraction, a concentration issue, and all the rest of it that goes on. Doesn't mean to say you never use it, but you pick the places that you're actually going to get some benefit from it.
So to me, all this chat GPT stuff and whatever, right? To me, it's the death of a new thought, because nothing's now being created new. These people, at least what happened was, you say, like, if you were researching something through an old, we were talking about, the Funken Wagnalls, right? That's with an N, not a C, right? They were old encyclopedias, and they're the encyclopedias that I used when I was a kid, because that's all we had at home, right? So what we would do, while you're reading, trying to find your information, you're learning something else.
Yep.
And then you're learning something else, and then you're learning something else, and then you actually sift through the information, and you find, or you extrapolate what information you need, but you've learned all this other stuff, okay? And then what happens is, then you can formulate a new thought with that as well, because you're filtering it in all different ways. Now, somebody else who would have read or done those things, like, through an encyclopedia or something like that, they've filtered and they've read all different other information, and they've learned all different other things, and then found the bit of information they need relevant to, say, a particular subject. But then they apply those things they've learned to that, and those things they've learned to that, and then you get two different ideas on the same kind of concept, which is like new thoughts. But if you go in, hey, what is the composition of the color orange? And the Google or ChatGPT will just go red and yellow mixed together at equal parts, and there's no other sort of like color chart around it. And I feel like all this technology is death of a free thought, personally.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's a really powerful point. The unintended learning that you take place, particularly when you're young, but through your entire life in that process, which enables you to then piece bits of information, if you like, that seem unconnected at the time, but may connect a bit later on. And that's called wisdom over time.
Wonderful.
Okay, Jason, we better wrap things up. But I mean, I've got a whole bunch of other questions I could ask you. I guess that's the important part of this whole issue with education. There's so many different aspects to it, and we want the best outcomes that we possibly can have for our students, because it is so important that they get a fundamental education, to set them up for their lives going ahead. But to finish off with, we always finish with this segment, and you may not be openly political as much as Adam and I are, but we ask this of all our guests. It's called Build Your Own Fantasy Government. Now, the idea of the exercise is that, Jason, you're in charge of the next Parliament of Australia, and you can choose 5 or 6 people to head up that government. Now, they can be current politicians, former politicians. They don't actually have to be politicians at all. I know you're part of Australians for Science and Freedom. There can be a whole bunch of people from there. But you're in charge. Anyone you want, 5 or 6 people to head up the next government of Australia.
Gee, that's such a tough question. I probably should start by saying...
We don't put you on the spot. We don't give any warning.
You're on the spot.
I'm going to start with an agnostic view. I come from a very safe Labor area. My father is a lifetime Labor member. I've spent a lot of time in Labor meetings and other things too. But having said that, on the other side, the Conservative side, as you said, I've been to Spectator events. So I've actually been both sides. I've spent time with Anthony Albanese, had the privilege to know him. But I've also met John Howard and Tony Abbott at the same time. So right now, for where we are in Australia, I think my number one recruit is going to be John Ruddick. I think really the number one thing that we need to actually reduce, which is something John Howard did do early on in the piece, is the influence of federal government bureaucracies. Unless you've worked in Canberra, I spent 5 years in Canberra, you don't actually understand how federal government actually works and what the priorities are. And that's a long story in itself. I'm happy to have with anyone who's interested. But and what we've seen is just an exponential increase in that, which means we've had bureaucracies taking control of things. So, look, in terms of character, individual character, you've also got people like Alex Antic out there and the usual people, Roberts as well. I know you've had on as well. And he said something interesting about we've been slack in terms of our involvement in decision-making process. And I think he's right in saying that. So people like that. My number one choice, I'm going to say right now for Australia, for our own benefit, is John Ruddock, with maybe Alex Antic in that process.
That's cool.
Well,
That's
John's saying, a lot of good things, and he does a lot of work and he works hard. So we haven't had too many people choose John, but I think it's a good choice, and we've had him.
I think John is going to be very happy if he's watching or if he sees this clip. I'll talk to him next time I go to one of their meetings, because I go to their regular meetings as well. And if I'll say, hey, you were picked to be, leader of Australia by Jason Strecker, and he'll go, oh, okay, and he'll watch this episode after saying that. Cool. You've definitely inflated his ego a little bit with that choice.
Look, in honesty, some of these guys deserve it. He's one of them that deserves to have all the positive praise on him, as does Alex Antic, as does anyone else, Matt Canavan and others that stood up and actually voted against their own party for the benefit of Australians. I'd love to say there's a Greens person, there's a Labor person that I can say, and maybe there's one hidden out there somewhere, but I haven't found them. I haven't found them yet, and I've been looking. Oh, geez. Please tell me if anyone on the audience knows someone for me to investigate in terms of either party, but particularly Labor. I would love to hear it.
And that's how the system's meant to operate. It's not meant to be such a heavy focus. I mean, I guess we started talking about this in the beginning, the party system and the party politics behind everything. It's meant to be one MP representing their area and standing up for the issues that are important to their area. And, I think we need to get back to that a lot more. But look, Jason, thank you very much for coming on tonight. As I said, this is a very interesting topic, and we could probably delve into it a lot deeper. Maybe we'll have you back on again in the future. For people that want to follow you and maybe contact you, what's the best way for them to do it?
Yeah, the easiest way is, as you put up there on X, at Jason Strecker, one word. If you follow me, I'll follow you back. You can send me a direct message if you don't want to broadcast it. And that's pretty easy to do so. So, no, that's good. Look, thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, viewers, as well. It's been a really enjoyable time. If there's any questions, I'm happy to stay around. If they're general questions, then I'll say hello to the rest of my family.
Yeah, no, we haven't got any questions in there at the moment. Can you see any questions?
I think everyone's still on holiday mode. They're probably out enjoying the sunshine, but I got a comment here from Sam. He said, please have a shave. Well, my wife's to blame for that, Sam. She hates it when I shave. She almost cries when I shave, so sometimes I have to keep her happy sometimes. So no.
So we have the opposite. Yeah, I think that's actually really offensive to say that. I've been trying to justify growing a moustache or beard for some time, and my wife won't have it.
Oh, really?
So you just got to keep the wife happy,
Well, I said the other day I was going for a ride, and I said all these young guys or guys without shirts on running, and they all had six packs. And I said to Kel, my wife, I said, you know what the thing that was the same about these guys? And she said, what? I said they all had a mustache or a beard. Yeah. I think that could be the power of what's going on.
The ultimate of masculinity, right?
That's exactly right.
And I find men seem to have the biggest problem when you're unshaven. Like you have a little bit of stubble, and some old bloke will come up to you and say, yeah, "Have you found that shaver yet?" Or something like that.
Yeah, where's the razor?
Women don't say a thing. Women are fine; they're happy. But men, if you're unshaven, they definitely have a go at you. But anyway, we better.
We'll wrap it up. But if we get any questions, or anything like
we'll give us the benefit of the doubt. Yeah, but we'll wrap it up. Thank you, Jason, and I do encourage everyone to jump on his Twitter. Also, jump on to the Australians for Science and Freedom as well.
Yep.
They had their first conference recently, and do they have any big plans coming up, Jason?
Look, like these things, well, they've actually been involved with the Royal Commission work as well, obviously. But like all of these organisations at this point in time, they've all bloomed, if you like, but they're very run very leanly. Yes. So there will be videos produced from the conference, ASF conference, and they were definitely hoping to have them out earlier than what they are. But watch this space in terms of that. For your viewers as well, join up, become a member of ASF, even if it's on the email list. It is an organisation that's worth supporting with some really good people in there. Yep.
Excellent. Yep. So that's scienceandfreedom.org if anyone wants to check that out. And also I'll put the link to the the terms of reference document. If you want to sign that, I'll put that in the link if for anyone to do that. But thank you again, Jason. Thank you, Adam, and thanks everyone for watching. If you really enjoyed this one, please follow us, like us, and subscribe, all that thing, and share us to all your friends. Share it out there. I mean, this is important information. We try and give, I guess, a platform to get this information out there. So if you can help out in any way, it would be much appreciated. And thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next time.
See ya.
Yeah.